Hey, hello, and welcome to this episode of, you know it, Learn Everyday English, your roadway to English proficiency. Glad to have you with me today. See, I'm in my living room, and I'm going to be recording a video, hopefully something you'll find interesting. And I can't take credit for this. Because this is kind of a commentary that I'm going to do about a video I watched on another person's YouTube channel, and I have to give him credit for this, but I'm going to kind of expand on what he was saying or give you my input, my thoughts, and my personal experiences of the 10 things that he talked about in his video. So I can't really take credit for these 10 ideas. But the gentleman's name is Steve Kaufmann. I'll write his name above, and I'll put a link to his YouTube channel. And he's well known in the language learning community because he's a polyglot. And a polyglot is a person who speaks numerous languages. I think I read a definition of polyglot as somebody who can speak like at least three or maybe four languages, at a fairly high level. But what makes Steve Kaufmann interesting is he's been learning languages for a long time. I think he's 77 years old, and he's a Canadian, and he speaks 20 languages, not all fluently, 20 languages. In some he speaks very well, fluently, some intermediate, maybe some he's just learning. I think he's in the process of learning Arabic and Farsi, if I remember correctly. But I'll put a link to his channel. And but he had a video not too long ago, or a little while ago. And the title of the video was called 10 Language Learning Mistakes. 10 Language Learning Mistakes, or mistakes that people make when they're trying to, learn a foreign language. So, but before I get into the meat of the matter, which is like really the main topic, the thing of substance, there's 3 things that you can do for me. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and 3, tell your friends about it so that they can benefit from these videos too, just like you. All right. So I'm going to go through the 10 language learning mistakes that Steve Kaufmann talked about, but give you my experience and what do I think about these 10 things. Do I agree with him on these things? Do I not agree? And give you my personal thoughts about it. So let's jump in to the video, or to the lesson. Okay, the first mistake that Steve talked about was expecting to learn too fast. And this can kind of happen because you've probably seen the videos too. Hey, you can learn English in 3 months, or I learned English in 3 weeks. And I had a young man on my channel not too long ago from India, and he learned English, I thought, pretty fast, in about 2 years, to a very high level. So, people can learn languages pretty fast, but, what average person, if you're working full time, if you have a family, if you have kids, maybe you have parents, older parents that you need to take care of, other responsibilities, it's very difficult to devote all your time or majority of your time to learning a language. So the time it takes is really going to vary. So we all know, in my opinion, 3 months is not realistic. Even a year, I don't think, to speak at a fairly high level, unless that's all you do all day long, 24/7. And I think I agree with Steve on this, because I remember when I first started to learn Spanish, I thought, okay, well, maybe in about, 2.5, 3 years, I'll be able to speak pretty fluently. And now I'm between 5 and 6 years studying Spanish. I can carry on a conversation about most subjects fairly comfortably, but I'm nowhere near fluent. So, it's taken me this long. So I think that's an expectation a lot of people have. Maybe they're overly confident in their abilities, but so don't expect, to learn a language real quickly, and don't put that pressure on yourself, okay? To me, the main thing in learning a language is to have fun with it, and enjoy the process, enjoy getting to the destination. Don't be in a rush. You probably know there's a fable we have a name in English. A fable is like a story that teaches a lesson. There's a famous fable about the tortoise and the hare. And a tortoise is kind of like a turtle, and they were in a race, and the hare, it's just kind of like a rabbit, took off, we say, in the race. He took off, he started very fast, but then I guess he got bored, he took a rest, and eventually the tortoise passed him up and won the race, because the tortoise was, we say, slow and steady. So there's another expression in English. We say, slow and steady wins the race. Slow and steady wins the race. The second language learning mistake that Steve mentioned was thinking we won't forget words or phrases that we learn. So we think, hey, once I learn a word or phrase, it's going to be locked away in my mind, and it's going to be there, and I can recall it. And I agree with Steve as well, because, there's words I've tried to remember or memorize, and I just can't, for the life of me, like I can't even stake my life on it, that I can't remember certain words. And I eventually am able to remember them because I've seen them over and over and over and over again. And eventually, we say it sticks. Eventually it sticks, like it sticks in your mind and you can remember. So the key, I think, in learning, words and vocabulary and phrases is exposure. Exposure. You have to be exposed to the language, exposed to the words over and over and over again. And eventually you're going to remember them naturally. So that's the thing that Steve talked about. So he mentioned also it's a process of learning to learn, and then we forget the word, then we learn it again, we forget it, we learn it, forget it. So that's a normal process. So don't feel bad that that happens to you, because I know it happens to me. The third language learning mistake that Steve Kaufmann talked about was trying to master grammar. And I know I've been guilty of this, because when I started to learn Spanish again when I was 54, I'm 60 now, I had to pretty much start all over from scratch. We say from scratch, which means from the beginning. I had learned Spanish in high school, but I pretty much forgot everything I had learned in high school. So when I started over, I had to learn it again. But what I did was I went to, there's a university here, some of you may know the story. I took one class for a semester, and I took actually for 3 semesters. Each semester I took a class, and it was just basically going over Spanish grammar and that type of thing you learn in school, because I wanted to relearn all these things. And for me, I guess it gave me a good foundation, but if I had to do it all over again, I know I would have started to listen a lot sooner and started to speak a lot sooner. I think I wasted a lot of time. But so a lot of people try to master the grammar, maybe too much. I think grammar is important. It is important. But some people spend maybe too much time focusing on grammar and not enough time focusing on listening comprehension and trying to speak. So you have to have a good balance. We say you have to have a good balance. And, focusing on grammar takes time. It takes time, just like learning vocabulary. And I'll give you an example from my situation. One of the hardest things to learn in Spanish is something called the subjunctive, or el subjuntivo. And I have a book just about the subjunctive. It's a very good book by a couple that live in Spain. The husband is from England, the wife is from Spain. But I've gone through that book twice already. And I'm taking online classes from a university in Mexico called UNAM. Last semester we studied the present subjunctive. This semester we're studying the preterite subjunctive, or el subjuntivo pretérito del subjuntivo. And I can tell you now, I still make mistakes with the subjunctive. I still don't know when to use a subjunctive all the time. And I've been studying that for probably 1 or 2 years now. So I know it's difficult trying to master some of the grammar in a new language. It just takes time. The fourth thing, language learning mistake, is expecting the language to become clear instantly. Hey, maybe you think I'll wake up one day, or I'll be studying after a year and a half, after 2 years, everything will be much more clear in my mind. I will be able to understand like a miracle. But from my experience, that doesn't happen either. To me, it's just a slow process where eventually things that you couldn't understand, you start to understand more and more clearly. But again, it just takes time. It takes time. And I'm finding I can understand things now I couldn't understand like 2 or 3 months ago. So it's kind of weird, like I've said before, how the mind works, the brain, how it adjusts. It absorbs all this information, and it starts to kind of change and grow in your mind as far as the ability to learn a language. It's really amazing. So don't expect to learn a language like instantly or become clear, say, in a point of time, because this leads to frustration, like Steve mentioned. The fifth language learning mistake is staying with easy content for too long, or listening to content that is too easy for you for too long, or reading something that's too easy. And I think we all may be guilty of this, because if it's easy or easier, we feel good. Hey, I can read all of that. I know what it's saying, and it gives us a sense of accomplishment. But we need to push ourselves, and we need to get out of our comfort zone, or push ourselves out of our comfort zone and challenge ourselves. And that's the only way we'll be it's like it's pulling us up to a higher level. So I remember I read or heard some information about this, and they said you should try to listen and read information that you can understand maybe 70 or 80%. And maybe there's another 20 or 30% you can't understand, or you have difficulty understanding, is like a good level that you should be, because that will start to pull you up and increase your ability and skill. So don't read stuff that's too easy, or listen to audio or watch videos that are too easily. You eventually need to challenge yourself with more difficult things. The sixth language learning mistake that Steve mentioned is that thinking we can get by with a few words. And I know I've seen videos was like, hey, you don't need to learn what are the 500 most common words in a foreign language. Hey, study those words, or maybe learn the most common 1,000 words in a language. Or maybe it's less than that, 250 words. And sometimes people think, okay, I'll be able to get by with not having to learn a lot of vocabulary, but I've found out that's not really the case. In order to have a good conversation about a lot of topics where you feel comfortable and you're not having to look in the dictionary, you need to learn vocabulary. Like I said earlier, that takes time, but you need to learn vocabulary to be able to have conversations about a lot of different topics. And that's one of the things that limits people when they first begin to learn a language. They can't really have conversation because they don't have enough vocabulary to talk about anything. So, but you need, as Steve says in his video, you need a lot of vocabulary. And the only way to do that is you need to do a lot of listening, and he says a lot of reading, to get exposure. And that's a word again, exposure to words. So you need to do a lot of listening, And according to Steve, you need to do a lot of reading. And I have to be honest with you, I do a lot of listening, but I don't do, say, a lot of reading. I do read, but I do more reading, far more, listening than I do reading. But I notice when I do read and when I have read, I notice I do learn a lot of vocabulary, maybe a lot quicker than listening. So that's a tip for you if you haven't been doing a lot of reading. Try reading as well as listening. The seventh language learning mistake that Steve mentions is expecting to speak well without speaking often. And I think I definitely agree with him on that. To speak well, he says, you need to speak a lot. And it's just like learning a bike or learning a skill. There's an expression in English, we say practice makes perfect. Practice makes perfect. So in order to get good at speaking, you have to speak. And I've learned this because when I first started speaking, I was only speaking with a gentleman from Mexico City like once a week for an hour. And my progress in speaking was very slow, very slow. And then I tell you a story, I signed up for at an internet site called Baselang, where you can sign up for a flat fee. I think it was like $140 a month. I could talk to teachers in an unlimited number of teachers a day, 7 days a week. If I wanted to have conversations, say 10 times a day, Monday through Sunday, I could do that. But what I did, I think I spoke at least 5 times a week, sometimes 6 times a week, 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a day, and I did that for 3 months. And that really helped my speaking ability and helped improve my speaking. And doing it through that platform was good, because if I had to pay like italki for individual lessons, the cost would have been a lot more than $140 a month. But after 3 months, I felt it was getting a little bit repetitive for me, and I canceled my membership. But yeah, I agree with Steve wholeheartedly, like very much so, that in order to speak well, you need to speak often. So how often are you speaking? Because I mentioned italki, there's other sites as well on the web, Verbling, I think Preply, and then you can find conversation partners through a site called Conversation Exchange, and you help each other learn a language, and that's free because you coordinate that among yourselves. The 8th language learning mistake that Steve mentions is being afraid of making mistakes. And I have to agree with him there too, especially as adults. We're afraid of looking foolish. People maybe make fun of us, or we don't sound like we're speaking well, and a lot of people are hesitant. They'll read with no problem, they'll watch something, but when it comes to speaking, they're kind of embarrassed, or they're real hesitant about it. But from what I've learned, you just have to speak. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. And also, when you make mistakes, that's kind of how you learn the language, how you learn. So we need to be like little kids. Little kids don't really care if they make mistakes or if they look foolish. They're just there trying to learn naturally. So we need to take that into consideration. And as Steve says, we tend to judge ourselves too severely or too harshly. We put too much pressure on ourselves to try to speak perfectly, and that's not going to happen. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Just like I said, enjoy the process. The 9th language learning mistake is not speaking with native speakers. And I think this is key as well, because I never really wanted to try to speak, say, with an American person that teaches Spanish or speaks Spanish. Because to me, if the person didn't grow up speaking the language, they don't really know all the nuances, like the little things, the detail things. Pronunciation may be not as good as a native speaker. And I think it's important if you're learning English, you really need to be speaking with native English speakers, whether they are from the United States, USA, or Canada, maybe Australia, New Zealand, England, Ireland, Scotland, even India. But some people have told me sometimes people from certain countries are a lot more difficult to understand than others. So that's a choice that you need to make, and maybe pick a country. And there's a lot of people from you can find on iTalki from a whole bunch of different countries, and just do that. For what I do mainly now, I try to speak with the people from Mexico, but sometimes I do speak with people from Venezuela or Colombia. So those are kind of the three countries that I like to talk with people from. But more so from Mexico. So I'm just trying to focus on that. So some people say it's good to focus on a accent or English from a specific country or Spanish from a specific country. Because Steve says this, not speaking with native speakers, it limits your vocabulary. And I think he's right, because non-native speakers probably won't have as big of a vocabulary as native speakers. So it's very important. So are you trying to speak with native English speakers? Hey, let me know. And the last thing, number 10, language learning mistakes that Steve Kaufmann mentions is expecting native speakers to reply in the language we are learning. So say where you live, maybe you're saying, hey, there's a lot of English speaking people. I can just go out, maybe I can have a conversation with them. But he says, don't expect that they will want to speak with you in English necessarily, because maybe you live in another country where English is not the language. Maybe they want to practice learning that language in the country that they're in, and maybe the person that speaks English, they feel, hey, maybe their English is not that good or as good as yours, so they may feel uncomfortable speaking English. And I learned this personally, because I've tried to do this here in the United States. I've seen some Hispanic people here, Spanish-speaking people, and I tried to speak with them, but on a couple of occasions, several times, but they wouldn't respond in Spanish. They would always answer and respond in English. And at first that made me a little bit frustrated, maybe a little bit upset, and I'll tell you a story. We had a work crew, I told this before, working out in the street, doing some work, telephone line work or something like that. And there was the crew leader, we say, the person in charge of the group. And he came over to tell me what they were doing, and I could tell his Spanish was his native language. His English was, we say, so-so, it was okay. But I could tell that he was struggling a little bit to talk to me and to explain certain things. So I thought, well, hey, I'm studying Spanish. Let me talk to him in Spanish. Maybe it will be easier for him to explain to me what they're doing. So I said something in Spanish, and he answered in English, and I said something else in Spanish, but he kept answering in English, so I got a little frustrated and just stopped. I said, oh, thank you, and I went back in the house. I told my wife, and she's Hispanic. She's born here, but she speaks Spanish. So she went out to talk with him, and she immediately said something to him in Spanish, and he immediately, with no hesitation, began to speak with her in Spanish, no English at all. And I was like, man, what's up with that? Why didn't he do that with me? And she came back and told me what they talked about. And I asked her, hey, why did he just immediately start talking to you in Spanish? Didn't have a problem, but he had a problem speaking with me. And she told me something, but maybe he felt that my Spanish wasn't at a level, I don't know, that was he wanted to speak with me in Spanish, or maybe he wanted to practice his English. That could be an option. So I've learned not to get frustrated or upset in situations like that. So don't expect everybody will want to or be excited to speak with you in English. So those are the 10 things that Steve Kaufmann talked about, that language learning mistakes that we make in learning a foreign language. So what did you think about those 10 items? Do you agree with those? Have you made some or a lot of those mistakes? I know I have. And I think that's good things to keep in mind as we continue on our language learning journey. So that's going to be it for the video. Hey, thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and tell your friends. And we'll talk to you next time on Learn Everyday English. Hey, check you later. Goodbye.